Stevenson is there. Okay. Wait.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. So, which all exams are you writing, Stevenson? JEE means then?
Sir, I யோசிக்கல sir. I
Okay.
haven't applied to anything, sir. I'm just I don't know, sir. What I'm gonna ask my friends. What are you writing?
Ah,
I'll read BitSat for sure. I'll read BitSat for sure, sir.
fine. Yeah, BitSat is one. And then BitSat is one, JEE mains is one. You can even write NDA, National Defense Academy. That exam you can write.
Sir, if things go south, I'll also write ICER entrance, sir.
Yeah, that is a must. Actually, I was about, if at all everybody is present, I thought I'll talk about it. That's actually a very nice platform.
They gave this dual degree, right, sir, for
Yes. That's
that
what. So
program.
they'll give
That's pretty interesting, sir. So even if like
TSMS,
I don't get
4
something,
years. Correct. No, it's actually a very pretty good course. If at all
yes, sir.
you are interested in science, pure science, either physics, chemistry, math, or biology. So either of it you can choose. So initially, for the first 1 year, they'll be training for the overall science. All subjects you'll study. But after I think second year or something, you will be specializing only one of the subjects, either physics or chemistry or mathematics or biology. So like it's a very flexible course in the sense that you will choose what kind of course you want to study. It's not like college will give you a timetable and you'll follow it. It's not like that. You will choose what subjects you want to study. That'll be one thing. And obviously it's like the central government, centrally funded institution, right? Like, and then after that, if you're gonna do either PhD or whatever it is, right? So the level of things you learn in those kind of colleges will be enormous, and more importantly, the practical applications of it, like the lab courses will be as mandatory, as important as the theoretical courses. So yeah, and it's a little easy to get through also. Like students, a lot of students apply, but you have a separate
That'll
exam
help
for.
you in getting into the teaching field, right, sir?
Not exactly. A teaching field is
Professor,
one of it.
like
Yes,
becoming.
that is one of it. Or you will be able to get into R&D of any say for example Bharat Petroleum, or say ONGC, or DRDO, any public sector undertaking. We call it as, what is it, public sector, PSUs, right? So any kind of PSU, there are so many, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of PSUs, central government owned subsidiaries. Basically, they have their own things. Bharat Petroleum is one, ONGC is one, DRDO, so many. What is that? ISRO, right? So all these are
Yes,
not
sir.
teaching fields, right? So basically, you will do research for them, like that's the thing. Or even if it is going to be, you're going to be in certain colleges. Say for example, if you're going to be at IISc Bangalore, it is not necessary that you have to teach. You can just do your research.
Research, yes,
Like,
sir.
yeah, so they are just research faculties, they are not teaching faculties, but some faculties will do both. Again, it depends on your interest, whether you want to continue teaching or you don't want to. It's up to you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. and you can get into industry also. Industry in the sense, any kind of industry. Say there are a lot of industries produces chemicals. I'm just talking about chemistry. Like, but all other fields will have equal amount of opportunities. Say you can go into petroleum industries, or you can go into semiconductor industries. Like lot of stuff, lot of stuff. Teaching is one of them. But yeah, money wise, if you think going into R&D in a private sector will give you more money, but if little less money in government institutions, like say any PSUs, or if you gonna become a professor. But the peace, right, that would be really great in government institutions. It's like
Yes, sir.
9 to 5 job, but for the amount of money will be good enough for you to have a luxurious life. Like they will only give you quarters, they will only take care of your expenses. There's nothing to spend with the money which they're going to give you. So yeah, again, if you're going to go into IITs, if you're going to do engineering, again, like there is very less probability that you will be able to end up in the engineering field, even if you go to IIT. See, what do you think? The main reason why people go to IIT is the campus interviews. They get initial packages will be very 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 high, right? But for those packages, are they going to their own relevant companies? What they studied, even in IITs, it's only, I would say, very less number of percentage. Say only 30% people go into the field which they are studying. Other than that, like all the others will go to some field, but their package will be some, again, package will not might not be high, but lot of companies comes. Like that way IITs are good. But if at all you're not studying for job, if you're studying for, like say, knowledge, and you want to work in that field only, you have to be really good in your studies in IIT, or you have to go for other research oriented programs.
Yes, sir.
That's the better way to look at it. Maybe any guys joined. Okay, yeah, we have 3. Cool. So we'll start. So we were doing solutions. So we completed 2 of the colligative properties. So today we'll do osmotic pressure, and then I'll teach you Van 't Hoff factor, and we'll do some problems on that, and then we'll go for solid state. Right. Where are you? Okay, here. Right. See, there are certain things which you have to understand, right? So when I tell this term isotonic solutions, right? So generally isotonic solutions, we say that they're going to have same concentration, right? They will have same concentration, but solutions is point of view, right? With respect to this particular chapter, when I say isotonic solutions, they are going to have same osmotic pressure, right? They have to have same osmotic pressure, even though the molarity might not be. But again, mostly you will see that if molarity is same, the osmotic pressure is same, isn't it? Okay. So when I say isotonic, like whenever you see in questions this isotonic term comes into the picture, you have to understand that the 2 solutions you're talking about are going to have same osmotic pressure. That's what you need to understand. Okay, right? Fine. So hope you remember the formula. Formula is pi is equal to C into R into T, where C is the molarity, R is the constant, and T is temperature in Kelvin. Okay, right. Fine. So we are going to do this. I have a table, solution and its osmotic pressure, pi, right? So first one is 10 gram glucose in 200 ml solution. This has a pressure of T1. Second is 10 gram urea in 100 ml solution, and that has T2. And third is 10 gram sucrose in 50 ml solution, and this has P3. Okay, so I want you to arrange P1, P2, P3 in the ascending order or descending order. P1, P2, P3 are the osmotic. Okay. So you understand that all the temperatures are same, right? Only what will you see is R is going to be same, temperature is going to be same. So the only thing which is going to vary is concentration, right? And what you see is more and more is the concentration, more and more will be the osmotic pressure. Correct, right? So if you just calculate molarities of all these things, whichever is going to have the highest molarity will have the highest osmotic pressure, isn't it? Right? So if I calculate the molarity of the first solution, that is 10 gram glucose on all of them, now see, okay, 10 gram glucose in 200 ml. So 10 divided by 180 into 200 into 1000, right? Okay. And I have M2 to be 10 divided by its urea. So molecular mass is 60 into 100 into 1000. And molarity of the third solution is 10 divided by 342 into 50 into 1000. So this is what I have. Okay. So what you see is common is this 10 into 1000 is common. Okay, 10 into 1000 is common for all the three things, right? So obviously whichever is going to have the lowest denominator for molarities, the denominator is 180 into 200 here it is 60 into 100, here it is 340 into 50. So whichever is going to have the least amount of denominator will have the highest molarity, and that particular solution will have the highest osmotic pressure, isn't it? Right? Fine. So now if I do it approximately, so 180 into 200, 18 into is 36. So you'll get 36,000 for this. And here you will get how much? 6,000. I've changed the marker, right? So here you will get 6,000, right? And here you will get, say, even if it is going to be 300 into 5, 300 into 5 will become 6,000. So it will be 60,000 approximately, I'm telling. The 42 is there, I didn't multiply it. Okay, so anyways, now you see whichever is having the least of all denominator, and that value is 6,000 here. For this 60 into 1000, 60 into 100 will become 6,000. That is the least value. The next highest value is 36,000, and the largest value here is 60,000. So can I say M2 is the greatest, then comes M1, and the third rank goes to M3, right? So how will I arrange P1, P2, P3? Now M1 is the highest, so P2 is the highest, then comes P1, then comes P3. That's it. Okay. Now see this problem is pretty easy, but what you have to understand here is how I did the calculations. Okay, right? How I don't have to calculate everything and anything and check for it. Doesn't matter, right? So you can just you can see that what is common, and accordingly you can just apply the math in a smart way, right? You will be able to solve these kind of questions in less than a minute. Okay, I hope everybody understood. How is this the answer? P2 is greater than P1 greater than P3. Okay, fine. Next question. Okay, fine. So the question says, please take down the question. A 5% solution of cane sugar, a 5% solution of cane sugar is isotonic, is isotonic with 1% solution of 1% solution of an unknown solute, of an unknown solute at 300 Kelvin, is isotonic with 1% solution of an unknown solute at 300 Kelvin. Now the question is, what is the molar mass of the unknown solute? Right? What is the molar mass of the unknown solute? Right? So I'll repeat the question. A 5% solution of cane sugar is isotonic with 1% solution of an unknown solute at 300 Kelvin. What is the molar mass of the unknown solute? Right? So I told you how it works. Isotonic means they're going to have same osmotic pressure. So see, they have given the percentages here. Tell me what kind of percentage you think is that?
Mass by volume.
Good. Right? It is mass by volume, because if they have, if at all in the same question and they didn't mention anything about the what kind of percentages, and they have also given density values, then what it would taken? Same question, 5%, 1%, and along with all this information, I also give the density of the solution. Then what percentage you take? Mass by mass or mass by volume or something else?
Mass by volume only, no, sir.
Yeah. So in this case, you see, right? Since we are dealing with molarities, right? Molarity is basically going to be number of moles by volume, or I can even number of moles. I can write it as mass. So it is going to be mass by volume. That's why we say that it is going to be m by v here in this question, right? But if at all something else is asked and I have given you density also, right? Now with density, you will be able to find the mass, right? Or density, if it is given. Anyways, we don't have to confuse ourselves. So here it is going to be molarity is number of moles by volume. So here the percentage givens are actually going to be in terms of m by v percentages. That's what is more important. Anyways, you do the problem. Oh, now 5 of you are there. Great. I hope everybody is doing the problem. Please don't sit idle.
Sir, molar mass of cane sugar is
342. Cane sugar is sucrose. C12H22O11.
okay, sir.
Sir, is it
So
68.4?
68.4 option is there. Yeah, it might be an answer. Correct. Maybe we'll check. Okay. So they're telling 5% solution of cane sugar is isotonic with a 1% solution of an unknown electrolyte, right? So when I say 5% of C12, in C22, C12 only, C12H22O11, that means 5 gram. This is M by V, as we said, right? So 5 grams of C12H22O11 is present in 100 ml of the solution. That's what it means. Same way, 1% means 1 gram of the particular solute is present in 100 ml of the solution. That's what it means. And both these solutions are isotonic in the sense that they're going to have same osmotic pressure. So I can equate these two equations in the sense. So basically pi 1 equal to pi 2. So if I equate that, I will be getting m of C12H22O11 into R into T is m of the unknown solute. Let me keep it as x, right? Into R into T into T, R into T. Are they giving same temperature? Okay, they have not mentioned anything. So that means obviously you're going to have same temperature. So RT gets cancelled. Right. So let me calculate this. So if I calculate, molarity will be number of moles by volume. Now number of moles will be given mass by molecular mass. So 5 divided by 342 into the volume, which is 100 into 1000 is equal to 1%. Also 1 gram divided by the molecular mass of X, right? We'll keep it as capital M. You should not get confused here. This is molarity of X. This is molecular mass, which I have to calculate. Into the volume. Volume is again 100 into 1000. So 100,000 gets cancelled. So basically M is going to be 342 divided by 5, which is 68.4 gram per mole. Yes, correct. Your answer is right. Okay, right. So like this, easy questions only will be asked from osmotic pressure. Cool. Right. Fine. Now we'll move on. I'll teach you something about Van't Hoff factor and we'll do some problem Van't Hoff solutions. Right. Again, I think it's an easy problem. Yeah.
I saw a theory question, sir. Something about hypotonic and hypertonic solutions.
Okay, let me speak about that. So when
No,
I say
basically, it was like, sir, it was like, no, this is actually a question in our school exam also, sir. I also saw it in a previous year paper. So basically, it said 0.9% of some solution is kept in a fully concentrated blood or something like that. Okay, so then they asked what will happen if it becomes 1.2%, something like that, along those lines.
See, when I say there's two terms, hypertonic and hypotonic. Right. Now you cannot tell it strings. Maybe from whatever analogy he tells, maybe that's what will happen. Depends. Anyways, on the okay. Anyways, we speak about it. So hypertonic and hypotonic, we cannot speak with respect to one solution, right? We can tell that one solution is hypertonic or hypotonic with respect to another solution. For example, I have a solution. Say whatever these things you gave, I have a solution which is some 0.9 m solution. I have some solution. Right. Now this is kept in a solution which is having say say this is a solution, and outside this, right, I have another solution which is having say some 1 m. Okay, right. So remember, hypo means less, hyper means higher, iso means same. Iso is same, hyper is higher, hypo is lesser. So what I'm trying to tell you is, if I take this solution, I will tell that this solution is hypotonic with the solution outside. Why? Because its concentration is less, right? But if at all this was 1 m and this was 0.9 m, then what it was said, this solution is hypertonic with the solution outside. It depends on which concentration is lesser. If the inside concentration is less, this solution is hypotonic with respect to this. If this concentration is higher, then I say that this solution is hypertonic with respect to this. Okay, Now, depending on which is higher and which is lower, obviously the osmosis will happen accordingly. It will happen from higher concentration to lower concentration. Correct? Right? So this is the higher concentration. So solid molecules will move inside the semi-permeable membrane. This is if this is semi-permeable membrane. Solid molecules will move inside. If it moves inside, what will happen? Obviously, the concentration outside. I mean, what I'm trying to tell you is that this movement will keep on happening until the time you see that the pressure inside and the pressure outside is going to be same. That's what is osmotic pressure, isn't it? The osmosis will happen. Osmosis will happen when the osmotic pressures on both sides are going to become equal, or in the sense that these two are going to become isotonic solutions. Until that time, the solute will move from a higher concentration side to the lower concentration side. Basically, at the end, right, you will see that maybe this would have become, say, something like 0.95. This would have also become 0.95. But again, it need not be exactly like that. Right? So the osmosis will happen until these two concentrations become same and the osmotic pressure comes into the picture. Right? So if for example, if the solute is going to come inside to the outside, this will become bulged, right? Or if this is going to solute is going to move from this side to this side outside, this will shrink. Again, depending on which concentration is higher. Did you understand what I'm telling?
Yes, sir, but I don't understand when it will shrink, when it will become bulk.
That's what. If solute moves out of this will shrink. Because
So when did you say that the solute moves out, sir?
In this situation, this is 0.9. Okay, for example, this will happen if the situation is like this. Inside is 0.9, outside is 0.8. What will happen? To make the concentration equal, the solute has to move from this side to this side to make the concentration equal. Yes. So obviously this side will become bulged and this inside solution will become shrunken.
Oh, okay, sir.
Did you understand? It depends on the concentration gradient. If the concentration is lesser outside, the solute will move outside and this will shrink.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
Okay. Right. Okay. So yeah. So that's about hypotonic, hypertonic, and isotonic. All three things we saw. Right. So we'll now study about this Van 't Hoff. Okay. Right. So this all came from experiments. Okay. So what happened is basically, we know why are we using colligative properties for, right? What is the major application of colligative properties?
Study non-ideal behaviors.
No. What is it mainly used for? Colligative properties.
So determining the molar mass.
Right. So I have an unknown solution. I have a solute. I have a solvent. Say solvent. I know what water is a solvent. Right. So I have put a solute in it. I don't know what is the solute. Right. Like without even knowing what is there, without even knowing what kind of solute I have, with the help of colligative properties, you will be able to predict the molecular mass of the solute. That is the application of colligative properties. Hope you know how to define colligative properties. Colligative properties are the properties which depends just on the number of particles, or say just on the amount, and it doesn't care about what is there, whether it's a electrolyte, a good electrolyte, or a bad electrolyte, right? Whether it's an ionic compound or a covalent compound. Nothing it needs to know, right? All it needs to know is how much is there, right? So based on how much amount of that particular substance is there, it will be able to tell what is the molecular mass of that particular unknown solute, right? Anything you take, say you take delta TF is equal to KF into M, right? Now this is an observable quantity, is it not? The change in temperature, like without pure solvent you have, you can put the thermometer and check where is it freezing, right? Now you add now you add the unknown solute, right? There'll be depression freezing point, and how much is decreasing also you can check, because again you have the thermometer, right? Okay. Now Obviously the Kf value is going to depend upon the solvent what you use, Kf for water or Kf for benzene or whatever it is, right? So this term, from this term, I will be able to calculate what is the molecular mass of the unknown solute. How? Say now this is number of moles by mass. Again, this is mass of solvent, right? This number of moles is for the solute. So it will be the given mass of the solute, which you know, this you know, divided by the molecular mass of the solute divided by the mass of solvent is what I have, right? So this term you know, this term you know, everything else you know, so this can be calculated. Okay, not only from this, for any colligative property, again, if you go for osmotic pressure, that time you use molarity, again you will have number of moles of solute there, again you will have molecular mass of solute there, right? Even if you go for relative lowering of the pressure, you have mole fraction there, again you have number of moles, so molecular mass can be calculated, right? So what I'm trying to tell you is all the 4 colligative properties are eventually going to be used for determining the unknown molecular mass of an unknown solute. I don't even know what, I don't even have to know what exactly is the chemical composition of the solute, but I'll be able to predict the molecular mass. That's the beauty of it, right? And as we all know, what among these 4, which is the best method to determine osmotic pressure? Among the 4 colligative properties, which is the best one to determine the molecular mass?
So osmotic pressure.
Osmotic pressure.
Okay, why? There are 2 reasons.
Because it gives a little bit higher values compared to the rest.
Okay, one is finite values, other one? Other one?
So I don't know.
Okay, anybody else knows? Okay, the measurements can be taken at room temperature itself. If I go for depression and freezing point, or say elevation and boiling point, either I have to decrease temperature or increase temperature for me to do that experiment, right? But osmotic pressure, I can do it in the room temperature itself. So 2 advantages. One, as you said, the finite value, right? The one good value, good large amount of value to work with compared to all the other 3. Second is about the temperature. The experiment can be prepared or conducted under room temperature conditions itself. Okay, that's what makes osmotic pressure the best one. Anyways, okay. So this is what you have to understand. All colligative properties are used for calculating the unknown molecular mass. Okay. Now this holds good, right? This holds good if you have any non-electrolytic solutions. What do you mean by non-electrolytic solutions? Which will not undergo any dissociation or association. For example, if you have NaCl, as soon as I have an NaCl solution with me, I know for sure that I have Na plus and Cl minus, right? Say if I'm going to have AlCl3, I know in water, in the presence of water, it can dimerize to form Al2Cl6, right? So all these things we know, but colligative property doesn't know. Why? Because it doesn't depend on the nature of the particle. It doesn't take into account the chemical composition. What are the elements present? That what kind of bonding structure they have? No, none of these are taken care with respect to colligative properties, right? So this particular thing, whatever you can calculate from the colligative property equations, the molecular masses which you find are good enough for these kind of solutions, non-electrolytic solutions, which doesn't undergo any association or dissociation, right? Say for example, glucose, sucrose, benzene, right? All these things, if you're going to dissolve in water, nothing will happen. They're going to stay as such, right? So for those things, it will work. But if I have any ionic solutions, any salt solutions, or anything which will undergo association, dimerization, polymerization, it won't work. Why? For the same reason that it doesn't know anything about the chemical composition, right? So obviously the molecular mass values which you're going to get from the calculations of through the colligative properties for these kind of solutions where association or dissociation could happen, you are not going to get the correct molecular mass. Okay, you are not going to get the correct molecular mass. That you need to understand. Okay, so we have to do something to correct this. Even if I use a electrolytic solution, even if you use a solution where association is possible, right? But with small correction to these equations, right, I should be able to get the correct molecular mass of the solute. For example, if I give NaCl, right? I should get 58.5. I should not get some other value, right? Okay, so anyways, how are we going to do it? We'll see, right? For that only we have your Van 't Hoff factor. Basically, the correction factor, right, is what is called as your Van 't Hoff factor I. It is denoted by the letter I. Okay, right. So we'll just look into it, right? So this Van 't Hoff factor I, right, is, or actually I'll just directly give you the equation, and from that we'll fetch whatever we want to fetch. Now I'm going to include whatever is the whatever be the colligative property. I'm going to include this I, Van 't Hoff factor. So all the equations will become like this. I have del P divided by PA naught is equal to I into XB, right? In all the equal to sides you put an I. Same way, I have delta TF is equal to I into KF into M, delta TB is equal to I into KB into M, and pi is equal to I into C into R into P. Okay, so you see all in this Van 't Hoff factor is incorporated into all of the equations of the colligative properties, right? Now what you have to understand is, people, this side whatever you have, these are all experimentally measurable quantities. I can measure the pressure, I can measure the temperature change, I can measure the pressure again, right? All these are experimentally determined values. And whatever you have in the other side, leave the I part, right? Leave the I part. All the other things you have, these are theoretically calculated. Is it not? Because you do the calculation there. Now these are direct measurements of these quantities, and these, if I just multiply, if I just take the multiplication of Kf into M, that is theoretically calculated, and that gives a theoretical value of delta Tf, right? Delta Tf is now whatever is on this side is experimentally determined, and the Kf into M value which you're gonna get, if I don't put this I, right, this Kf into M and this delta Tf wouldn't have been same. But since I'm going to put this I, right, if I multiply Kf into M, which is not going to be the true value, but if I multiply this, then I'm going to get the correct experimental value. Then the experimental value and the theoretical value will go hand in hand. Okay, right. So you can easily tell how am I going to define the Van 't Hoff factor I is equal to, say, these are the experimental values, these are the theoretical values. So you are going to tell Van 't Hoff factor as experimental colligative property divided by the theoretically calculated colligative property. Okay, right? So experimentally determine the colligative property is on this side, right, is equal to, divided by the theoretically calculated colligative property, which is Kf into MR, C into R into T, or just the XB, whatever it is. There's a theoretically calculated. Okay, right. Fine. So now you're speaking in terms of the colligative property value. What if I want to speak in terms of molecular masses? That's where the problem actually comes, isn't it? Right. Now, what you have to understand is, guys, what you have to understand is any colligative property is, if you just look into any of the equation, will be inversely proportional to the molecular mass of the unknown solute. You can check if you want. You have pi, concentration is here, concentration is number of moles by volume. Again, number of moles is what? Given mass by molecular mass. So molecular mass will be in the denominator here. Same goes with molality here. Same goes with the XP also. Okay. So any colligative property you check, you will be able to find that the colligative property value and the molecular mass value which you want to find are inversely related. Okay. So I'll be able to give one more equation with respect to mass. So I is again equal to, right? So in this case, it's going to be ulta. Theoretical molecular mass, that is, you calculate from the colligative property calculations, from the equations you calculate, okay, divided by the actual mass. Actual mass, we don't call it as experimental mass. We know what is the actual mass. For NaCl, the actual mass is 58.5. Okay, divided by the actual molecular mass of the compound. Okay, so two ways we'll be able to speak. Okay, either in terms of colligative property or in terms of the molecular masses. Theoretically, what you calculate divided by what is the actual amount, right? Okay, fine. Now there is one more way of defining it. If I will be able to do it in terms of equilibrium. Okay, Now, please understand, people. So we came into this picture because we are telling that association or dissociation into ions, right, creates a problem, right? Now, obviously, this I value will depend on how much dissociation or how much association is happening. Is it not how much? For example, if I have 1 gram of the solute, right? If I dissolve in water, out of the 1 gram, say not entire 1 grams can dissociate, right? Say 0.8 grams of that, or say 0.9 grams of that will dissociate, right? So accordingly, the I value will also change. Okay, so obviously after the 80% after the 80% got dissociated, what will happen? Equilibrium will be existing. Is it not? Like I have 1 gram, say 0.8 grams became ions, right? So this 0.8 grams of the ions formed, and the left out 0.2 grams of the undissociated molecules will be in equilibrium, right? So that way also we'll be able to define it, right? So if we do that, I can write, say for example, I have some AX dy. Okay, now AXB, or I'll just take first normal molecule. I have NaCl. Now NaCl will give me Na plus and Cl minus once I dissolve it in water, right? Okay, now this, okay, assume that we start, like for any of these type of calculations, we are going to take 1 mole or 1 m concentration. Okay, so this was 1, this was 0. Now at equilibrium, what would have happened? Some alpha would have gotten converted into ions. So alpha will come here, alpha will come here. Okay, now this is a very easy and very good definition for Van 't Hoff factor with respect to problem solving. This is a very good thing. Remember, Van 't Hoff factor I is equal to total number of moles at equilibrium. This is really going to work for you in a very good way in problem solving. Okay, not only for this, even in case of equilibrium, you'll be able to incorporate it if you want. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is Van 't Hoff factor I is equal to total number of moles at equilibrium. And I say total number of moles of reactant and the number of moles of product summed together. That is what is the total number of moles. Okay, right? So I can easily tell, you can easily see here, for this particular case, if I calculate, I is equal to total number of moles in equilibrium. So it will be 1 minus alpha plus alpha plus alpha. This is what is equilibrium conditions. And I'm going to sum up all these things, right? 1 minus alpha plus alpha plus alpha. Then I say it will be 1 plus alpha, right? It will be 1 plus alpha, right? Now, if at all you are finding it difficult to understand, how did it define it, right? So basically, if you put alpha has 100%, if I tell that whatever amount I had will become will undergo dissociation, what is the alpha value? Alpha value will be 1, right? So if alpha value is 1, what will be the I value? I value is 2. So complete dissociation basically means the entire thing is converted into 2 molecules. That's what you need to understand. 1 molecule becomes 2 molecule. So that's the ratio. Before, how many I had? And after the process, how much I have, divided by before how many I had. That is the count for I. After that I have 2 molecules, before that I have 1 molecule, so 2 by 1 will become 1. This will happen if there is 100% dissociation, if alpha value is equal to 1, but you will not find it as 1 in most of the cases, right? Okay, now this is for a dissociation process. What if association happens? Say association, let me do it like this. Say I have something, say I have A, 2 times of A becomes A, 1 molecule of A. Okay, say I start with 1 mole, initially 0, at equilibrium, what will happen? Now, if I see, just for the calculation purposes, you can put alpha here. But if you put alpha, 2 moles gives 1 mole. So you have to put alpha by 2 here. If at all you don't want this confusion, you put 2 alpha here. So 2 moles gives 1 mole. So 2 alpha will give 1 alpha. This would be fine. Or if at all you want to do it that way, that is also fine. Either way, you'll get the same answer. Okay, now I'll calculate I. Same definition, total number of moles at equilibrium. So it will be 1 minus 2 alpha plus alpha. So you have 1 minus alpha as the I value. Okay, so by this way, if you just remember this particular term, Vanta factor's total number of moles at equilibrium, you will be able to get a relationship between alpha, that is the degree of dissociation, with the Vanta factor, and that will be very useful for the problem point of view. Okay, right? Fine. So I think this is enough for the theory part, right? So we'll do some problems. Any questions you have, you can ask. Okay, and one more thing, right? In the questions, right? You might not know when to use Vanta factor, when not to use Vanta factor, right? So remember, whenever you have whenever you have solutions like NaCl, anything which can undergo dissociation, anything which can undergo association, you have to include the Vanta factor. Okay, and what is the value of Vanta factor you will put? You will put the Vanta factor. If they give you any alpha in the question, then you calculate I and then put the alpha. But if no alpha is given, by default, take the alpha value as 100% or 1 and do the I value and then include that in the equation for calculating the colligative property. Okay, be very careful. But if at all solutions are like glucose, sucrose, urea, all these things given to you, you don't have to include the Vanta factor because no association or no dissociation will happen. Okay, so by this way only you will understand where to use the Vanta factor, where not to use the Vanta factor. If it's an electrolytic solution, definitely you have to use Vanta factor. If it's a non-electrolytic solution like glucose, sucrose, urea, any other thing, you don't have to use. Okay, right. So we'll do some problem. Okay, write down the question. Are you hearing any background noise?
No, sir.
Okay, good. Fine. So yeah, take down the question. 0.004 m, capital M, 0.004 m, capital M, Na2SO4, sodium sulfate. Solution is isotonic with 0.01 m, capital M, 0.01 m, capital M, glucose solution at 300 Kelvin. Glucose solution at 300 Kelvin. Okay, so what I'm asking is find the degree of dissociation of Na2SO4. Find the alpha of Na2SO4. Okay, I'll repeat the question. 0.004 m, capital M, Na2SO4 solution is isotonic with 0.01 m glucose solution at 300 Kelvin. Find the degree of dissociation of Na2SO4. Now you can see both are isotonic. Okay, we know what is going to be equal. Osmotic pressure is going to be equal. That is fine. But Na2SO4 is an electrolytic solution, whereas glucose is not. So for Na2SO4, you have to include I. For glucose, you should not include I, and make both the osmotic pressures equal. I into C into R into T will be equal to C into R into T. Right? So you can calculate the I value, and from that, you can do the equilibrium table. You can get the alpha value also. Okay, go for it.
Sir, I'm getting a negative value.
Yes, sir. Same, sir.
Okay, we'll check. How will you get a negative value? Fine. So
Sir, I got
the
3 by 4.
3 by 4 is 0.75, 75%. I think you're right. Okay, we'll check. Right. Fine. So I have the Na2SO4 solution is isotonic with your glucose solution. So both the osmotic products are the same, right? So I into concentration of Na2SO4 into R into T is equal to I into concentration of glucose. I is not there. So concentration of glucose into R into T. So R and T gets cancelled. Both are at 300 Kelvin, right? Okay. So now what is so they are given the concentration also, right? So both these concentrations are given. So I is equal to concentration of glucose divided by concentration of Na2SO4. Concentration of glucose is 0.01. Concentration of Na2SO4 is 0.004. So that would be, if I multiply by 3 times, so it will be 10 divided by 4. Is it correct? No, if I multiply it by 1000, these 2 points and one more 0. Yeah, 10 by 4 is what I'll get. 10 by 4 would be 2.5, right? So yeah, I value is 2.5. Okay, now let me make the equilibrium table. Na2SO4 gives me 2Na plus SO4 2 minus, right? 2Na plus SO4 2 minus. So if I start with 1 mole 0 0, if I go for at equilibrium, it will become 1 minus alpha. Here it will be 2 alpha. Here it will be alpha. I think both of you would have missed this 2 alpha. Am I right?
No,
Did
sir.
you
We
miss this
did
two?
division mistake, sir.
Oh, okay, fine. So now you have 1 minus alpha plus 2 alpha. So can I say it will be 1 plus 2 alpha? This is what is I? I
Now
is
I got
total
it.
number of
Yes, sir.
I is total number of moles at equilibrium, right? So alpha value we know. Alpha value is 2.5. So it will be 1. What happened? Oh, sorry. 1 plus, or I would say 2 alpha is I minus 1. I is 2.5. So this will become 1.5. So this would be 1.5 divided by 2, which will be 0.75. And they're asked in terms of percentages. So this into 100 will be 75%. Would have been the answer. Yes, your answer is right. Okay, right. Right. Just one more question. We'll wind up. Okay. If you're taking this down, I can run this part.
Sir, I thought you dictated the concentration of Na2SO4 as 0.04. So
Oh,
I got it.
okay. Understood. Right. Okay. One last question. Right. So I have 4 solutions. 0.1 m Na2SO4. Second, 0.1 m of C6H12O6. 0.1 m of MgCl2. Okay, instead of having and 0.1 m of aluminum nitrate.
Sir, is it molality?
Yeah, it's m. Small m is molality. Okay. Now the question is, out of these 4 options, which has the highest boiling point? Which has the highest boiling point?
Sir, fourth one, sir.
Fourth
Van
one.
der factor will be 4 or something.
Yeah. Okay, fine. So you can easily see here it's delta TB, which is TBF minus TBI. Please understand. Okay, TBF minus TBI, right? So we are talking about this TBF. Okay, fine. So this is equal to I into KF into M, KB into M. And all the molarities are same, KBs are same, all are aqueous solutions, right? So what you have to understand is this will be directly proportional to the Van 't Hoff factor. Is it not? Right? So whichever is going to have the highest Van 't Hoff factor is going to be the answer. And obviously you see whichever will undergo dissociation into more number of ions, that will have the maximum Van 't Hoff factor. Thus this will go to form 2 Na plus and SO4 minus 3. This will not undergo any dissociation. MgCl2 also will give you 3, 1 Mg2 plus and 2 Cl minus. And aluminum nitrate will give 4 ions, 1 Al3 plus and 3 numbers of nitrate ion will give you 4. So that if I would have asked you which is going to have the highest freezing point, what would have been answer? Or yeah, which is going to have the maximum out of these 4, which is going to have the maximum freezing point, what would have been your answer? Hmm? Hope you understood my question. For the same options, if I asked you which is going to have the highest freezing point, what would have been your answer?
B, sir.
Yeah, right. So remember, delta TB is elevation and boiling point in the sense that more and more is the I value, more and more will be the boiling point of the final solution. But when I talk about delta TF, here it is depression and freezing point. So more and more will be the value of I, the lesser and lesser will be the freezing point. The lower and lower the freezing point will decrease. Right? So whichever is going to have the highest I value will have the lowest freezing point because it is depression and freezing point. Okay, so in that case, whichever is going to have the least of all I values is what is going to be the answer for highest freezing point, and that would be glucose, which doesn't undergo any dissociation. If there was a molecule which was undergoing association, then that would have been an answer because that will have I value less than 1, 0.5 or something like that. That will be still more, will have a higher freezing point. Okay, so hope you understand this question can be tweaked in whatever way I want. Highest boiling point, lowest boiling point, highest freezing point, lowest freezing point. Either way, you must be able to answer. Okay, so that's it. That's about your solutions chapter. So we'll move on to solid state. So with that, your physical chemistry is over. So after that, we have only 2 more chapters, and that would be metallurgy and surface chemistry. Okay. Do you want me to teach surface chemistry? Or was that included in the portions for you, surface chemistry entirely?
No, sir. Some was either emulsions were deleted, sir.
That's a very small part. Okay. Other than that,
only emulsions, I think so.
Okay, maybe
even catalyst is deleted.
Sorry.
Even catalyst is deleted.
Oh, catalysis was not there.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so emulsions you leave. Emulsions only. Emulsions means it's a type of a colloid which is going to have both dispersed phase and the dispersed medium to be liquids. That is what is an emulsion. And I have 2 types of emulsion: oil and water, and oil and water, and water and oil. That's it. That's what you need to know. Nothing else. Only 2 statements. What is an emulsion? What are the 2 types of emulsion? That's it. Maybe catalysis I'll teach you. It's that again is going to be very small stuff, right? Other than that, what you need to study more importantly is about the lyophobic and lyophilic colloids. Okay, that part you concentrate, and the table in the sense they would have given you examples, right, for this gas as a dispersed medium and liquid as a dispersed phase.
Yes, sir.
Something they would have given you a table. Look at the examples. So questions can come from that. They will just give you, I have smog, I have fog, which it comes under, or say what is the dispersed phase and what is the dispersed medium, or what is the name of the colloid, right? So name of the colloid, the phase of the dispersed medium and dispersed phase, and the examples. 3 things from the table. You need to make sure you know it only from the table, nothing more than that. And the lyophobic and lyophilic colloids, and about the adsorption isotherm. Adsorption isotherm, you know, right? Your Freundlich adsorption isotherm. If I remember the equation correctly, it will be x by m is equal to k p power 1 by n. Am I right? Is it correct?
Yes, sir.
X by m is equal to k p power 1 by n, right? So x is the mass of the substance getting adsorbed. This m is the mass of the total adsorbate. Adsorbate is providing the surface. Adsorbent is getting adsorbed on the surface. So this is the mass of the adsorbent, which is getting adsorbed. And this m is the mass of the adsorbate, which is providing the surface, right? And k is a constant and p is the pressure, right? So this graph, how will you look? Because if you take log of these term, it will become log x by m is equal to log k plus 1 by n log p. So you'll have a straight line formed equation with 1 by n as the slope, k as the intercept, right? So you have to know about those things, right? So I just summarize what all you need to know, right? You need to understand, first thing is the table. What are the different colloids? What are different types of colloids? Lyophobic and lyophilic colloids, right? And the properties of colloids, properties, Brownian movement, colors. One more important thing. So in first, okay, in colloids, we'll see for first order. In colloids, type of colloids, lyophobic and lyophilic colloids, properties of colloids, and among properties, you have to look at flocculation, flocculating power. Something will be there. Hardy-Schulze rule. Am I making you afraid? No, I'm not. I'm just talking about what is there in your NCERT textbooks. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, right. So Hardy-Schulze rule for flocculating powers. Higher the amount of charge, higher is the flocculating power. Right. So only your NCERT, if you can just go through properly with all the important points, more than sufficient. Questions, if they're gonna come, they will come from Freundlich isotherm or from whatever the areas I've spoken about. But again, very rare. Right? Only
Sir,
theoretical
Hardy-Schulze
questions.
rules only has 2 rules, no, sir? The oppositely charged only.
Exactly. Right.
And then higher the charge, the higher the coagulating power.
Correct. That's it. Right. And you have to understand, how do you protect a lyophobic colloid with a lyophilic colloid, electron double layer. Electron double layer, in the electron double layer itself, you have zeta potential. Right. The difference, the potential difference between the first layer and the second layer. How do you form the electron double layer? Right. So all these things, you know, pretty easy, right? I have the Sol. Sol will generally have a double for a single layer of charges for itself, because it will be either a positive colloid or a negative colloid, right? So because of the first layer of charge, obviously the other layer of charge is going to get induced. Say for example, if I have positive charge around the colloid, electrons are going to get embedded in there. So you'll have 2 layers of charge, one positive layer, one negative layer, right? So like those kind of stuff you need to know in surface chemistry. Only your NCERT. I'm not asking you to study anything else. Only NCERT. But it's a very interesting chapter also. Just go through it. And Freundlich adsorption isotherm, you go through very particularly. Okay. So maybe instead of starting solid state, maybe I will complete catalysis. Today we have only half an hour. Okay. So we'll complete catalysis, and I will completely teach you metallurgy. And oh, we have one more chapter, no, amines. So that also we have to see. Okay, so maybe now I'll start with catalysis, right? And then tomorrow's class I'll go for metallurgy. I'll complete it. Okay, and the last class would be for amines. Okay, maybe one more class for problem solving, but I don't think it will be required. Right. So whenever I'll tell you tomorrow I'm going to teach amines, means you'll study the NCERT and come. Right. So whatever is there, not there in your NCERT, the mechanisms, some extra reactions are there. That one I'll teach, and we'll go for problem solving. Okay. So you can count it as last 1 to max 4 classes. Last 4 classes. Okay. Right. Fine. So today we'll see catalysis. There is nothing big there. we already know how catalyst works in terms of um, kinetics, right? I told you that they're going to provide an alternate mechanism, right? Provide an alternate mechanism for the reaction, and thereby it will decrease the activation energy. That's what I told you, right? Okay, so here, we are not going to study nothing big anyway. So when I say catalysis, okay, so a catalyst or whatever it is. Now, when I say first catalysts, right? Now, catalysts can be of two types. One are what are called as activators, right? And the other one are what are called as inhibitors. Okay, so what I mean by this is activators are the one which will increase the rate of the reaction, right? And inhibitors are the one which will decrease the rate of the reaction. Okay, right. Now, along with catalysts, sometimes, right, catalysts plus something you add. Okay, sometimes what happens is the catalyst is reactivity. The catalyst is going to improve the reaction rate so much that the reaction is going to become explosive, right? Or say it's a good catalyst, but it is not giving me enough increase in rate, right? So either too much reactivity or not to the extent of what I require reactivity. So those cases can also come, right? So along with the catalyst, you add something else. It's called a co-catalyst. Like you can just, but co-catalyst, they don't use generally in inside the textbooks. But anyways, you can just call it as a co-catalyst, assistant catalyst, right? So this catalyst again can be of two types, right? Now that is what is called as your promoters, and the other one is what is called as poisons, right? Now promoters increase the activity of the catalyst, right? Promoters increase the activity of the catalyst, okay? And poisons decrease the activity of the catalyst. Now if at all I want to give you an example for poison, you would have written this H2 palladium in the presence of BaSO4, right? Palladium is the catalyst, right? BaSO4 is actually a poison, right? They say palladium poisoned with BaSO4. That's what they say. If at all, I don't know whether it's given in a textbook, but that's what they generally say. Palladium poisoned with BaSO4. That means I don't want reaction to be too much violent, right? So I add something along with the catalyst so that the activity of the catalyst decreased. In this case is the example. Okay, right? Now, instead of using this promoters, generally what they do is they go for increase in temperature, increase in pressure, right? Putting the catalyst alone will not be sufficient. That sometimes, say for example, if I take Haber's process, N2 plus 3H2 giving ammonia, right? Here you use Fe as a catalyst, right? But other than that, you also do something. You go for around 600 degrees Celsius, 300 atmospheric pressure. All these things you do. Okay, right? So again, this can be considered as co-catalyst, but again, they are not exactly some chemical species. They are just conditions which makes the catalyst work better, work efficiently. Excuse me. Right? Okay. So that's about catalysts and what are the different types of catalysts, activators and inhibitors. And you add something along with the catalyst, and they can be of two types, promoters and poisons. Okay. Right. Now when I talk, yeah. What is the
exact name of co-catalyst?
Oh, what is the exact name of co-catalysts? That's a good question. Catalysts. I'm not sure, Kana. Okay, check whether it is there in your book. If it is going to be enzymes, if it is going to be basically in your body also, you will have some so many chemical reactions happening, right? And all these biochemical reactions are catalyzed by something called as all the biochemical reactions. Right, so biological catalysts, right? So enzymes are the one which will catalyze the biochemical reactions, right? So if I know what is the exact name for enzymes along with this, so enzyme plus something called as a cofactor. is what is this, promoters or poisons. I'm not sure exactly what do you call a catalyst, what is the exact name of a co-catalyst, but I'm not sure. Please check your notebooks. If at all you don't find it, don't worry. They like, see, this is just a generic term. Different people use different names, but this is constant. I have an enzyme. Along with it, I have something called as a cofactor. That is okay. That is a proper scientific term I use, but here I don't think you have a proper term. But if you find it in any textbook, well and good, use it, because it is not going to be that important. Okay, right. So yeah, so that is about the catalyst. Now, when I talk about the catalysis, catalysis means the process of process of the reaction, right? So when I talk about catalysis, right? So catalysis is the process. So this can be either homogeneous catalysis, or you can have heterogeneous catalysis. Okay. Now, what do you mean by this is when the reactants and the catalyst are of the same phase, right? The catalyst and the reactants are of the same phase, except solids. Right, except solids. Now, what I'm trying to tell is, when you are going to mix the reactant and catalyst, that is a mixture, correct? Now, that mixture, if it is homogeneous, it's called a homogeneous catalysis. You know what is a homogeneous mixture? Everywhere the concentration is going to be same, right? Say, for example, if I have alcohol, right, and for dehydration of alcohols, I use concentrated acids, H2SO4 I use. Correct. Now, both these alcohol and the acid, if I mix them together, they will form a homogeneous solution, because both are miscible liquids. You know what is the difference between immiscible liquids and miscible liquids? Immiscible liquids will have a layer between them. Oil and water will not mix, right? But alcohol with H plus, alcohol with any acid is okay for me. They will form miscible liquids. So those times it is going to be called as homogeneous catalysis, even for gases. Right? Say I have any reaction, if I have to give you, say this is a very good example. I have, no, this also won't work. Anything should be a good example. I'm just looking for homogeneous is okay, right? If I look at a heterogeneous, say for example, you see, what is that? Ethene with hydrogen in the presence of nickel. Now you see this and this are gases, right? The ethene and H2 are gases, but nickel is a solid, right? Now, though they will not form any homogeneous mixture, right? So that will come under heterogeneous catalysis. Okay, right. So here I'm going to have different phases for the reactant and the catalyst. They are going to have different phases. Now, please understand, even if your reactant and the catalyst are in solid phase, both of them are in solid phase, I still call it as heterogeneous. I'll repeat again. When you have a solid reactant and when you have a solid catalyst, you see the phases are same, right? But still, I will call it as heterogeneous catalysis. Now, the reason is they are not going to form a homogeneous mixture. You know, when you cannot mix two solids to form a homogeneous mixture, highly impossible. Unless and until you grind them nicely, you just powder them and then try to mix them. Then also 100% homogeneity is very difficult, right? So by the moment you see solids, whether both of them are going to be solids, that means equal phase, or even if one of them is a solid, that is reactant or the catalyst, you say that it is going to be heterogeneous catalysis. Okay, that's it. And there'll be numerous examples given in your textbook, NCERT textbook. Please go through it. Different for homogeneous catalysis, for heterogeneous catalysis, for poisons, promoters, activators, inhibitors. For all of them, please look at some examples. The NCERT examples are more than sufficient. And the examples, some examples even I gave. Okay, so yeah, that is about catalysis and how catalysis happens, right? So there is this lock and key mechanism. right? There are two mechanisms actually. I will just look into it. Okay, so the mechanisms of catalysis. Right. First one is what is my lock and key mechanism. You know, right? Lock and key. Okay. So what do you mean by this is this is my catalyst surface, and this is going to have. I'm sorry, I'm running out of markers. Just a moment, guys. Okay, so I have the catalyst surface, right? So this is what is called as receptor site. With this was actually given for enzymes actually, right? The biological catalyst we have inside our body. Okay, so for that it is predicted, for that it is given, but still it holds good because they are catalysts, right? So this is a receptor site. So now the substrate is going to come like this. It should be in proper shape. Obviously this is not a proper shape, but this should be in proper shape. This is my substrate. Okay, now this substrate is going to come, and this is going to fit here. Okay, and the chemical reactions are going to happen, and the products will come. That's it, as simple as that. Okay, so I have a catalyst which is going to have a receptor site. To that, the substrate is going to come, the chemical reactions happen, and then the product is eventually taken up. First it gets locked, a reaction happens, and it comes out when given the key. Is it okay? Right, this is a very simple mechanism, don't worry about it. Okay, now other than that, I have second mechanism which is with respect to adsorption. Okay, first with respect to adsorption mechanism, right? I think we have already seen it, right? Some examples of adsorption mechanism, when you have ethene getting hydrogenated with the help of hydrogen and nickel. Nickel is going to provide me a surface. Ethene and H2 are going to get adsorbed on the surface of nickel. Chemical reaction happens, the product forms. We know this, right? That's exactly the same thing here. So, but there are different steps. We just go to the steps of how this is going to happen. The first step here is diffusion of the reactants towards the surface of the catalyst, right? So you have the catalyst surface, the reactants are somewhere, right? Now the reactants has to slowly diffuse, come near the surface. That's the first step, diffusion of the reactants, right? Second this thing is the adsorption. Now they are close enough, right? The reactants are close enough to the reactant surface, to the adsorbent surface, so the adsorption will happen. How many other reactants you have, right? Now after the adsorption happens, the third step is the chemical reaction. Now the reaction happens. Now both the reactant molecules are sufficiently closer enough, so they will interact together, so the chemical reaction happens, right? And after the chemical reaction is happening, you will form the products, right? Eventually the reactants would have now converted to the products, right? The next step is desorption. What has to happen? Now the product is again adsorbed with the catalyst surface. The product has to go out of the adsorption, and that opposite process is what is called as desorption of products, right? Desorption of the products. And the last step, again, they should the product molecule should be very far away from the catalyst surface so that they don't get adsorbed again, right? So they have to diffuse away from the surface, right? So the last part is again diffusion, but diffusion of, in this case, it is going to be the product away from the catalyst surface. Here, diffusion of reactants towards the catalyst surface, right? So these are all the different steps which for catalysis with respect to the mechanism of adsorption. Okay, so lock and key mechanism and adsorption mechanism, you can know both. Both are very easy. I have very complex theories which explains, if I just bring in the mathematics, that's it, right? Okay, so I think what is the time? It's 6:20. We have 10 more minutes. Any other question you have from surface chemistry chapter? We'll just finish it today. If you have any other questions, you can ask. No questions? Okay, let me ask you a question. What do you mean by, okay, tell me, what are all the properties of colloids? Tell me all the properties of colloids. What are the properties of colloids? Is everyone there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what are the properties of colloids? Say first about the particle size. How is the particle size?
Sir, I don't remember the exact range. It's some 10 power minus 10 meters.
No, remember, it is 1 nanometer to 10 nanometers.
Oh, okay.
Okay, the size of the particles in colloids are going to be between 1 nanometer to 10 nanometer. Okay, fine. What are the other properties? One is about the particle size. Other things?
They are classified into lipophilic and phobic.
Okay, see, there are different ways of classification. First, based on what is the phase of the dispersed phase and what is the phase of the dispersed medium. That is whether dispersed phase can be solid, liquid, gas. Again, dispersed phase can be solid, liquid, gas. Based on that, I have, say, aerosols, emulsion, sol, solid sol, what else? So many things are there, right? So those are second classification. I mean, yeah, first classification is, that is the first classification actually, right? The first classification is going to be based on what is the phase of the dispersed phase and dispersed medium. That is the first classification. Second classification is what you told, based on stability, right? Stability in a particular solvent, right? So lyophilic colloids are going to be more stable because they have good interaction between the dispersed phase and the dispersed medium. Dispersed phase and the dispersed medium loves each other, right? But in lyophobic colloids, they are going to have enmity, right? So they're going to be unstable. The dispersed medium and the dispersed phase hate each other, so they will not be able to stay together, right? Fine. That is second way of classification with respect to the stability of the colloids. What is the third category of classification? What is the third category of calculation? See, not calculation, classification.
Size of particles in dispersed phase.
Yeah, right. So can you tell me what are the types?
Macro and micro.
That's it.
Missiles.
Okay. So you have associated colloids, right? And you have multi-molecular colloids. And then what? Even I forgot. So you have 4 or 5 things there. So multi-molecular, macromolecular, associated colloids, and micelles, I think. 4. Okay. So these 4 you need to know what are they.
Sir, associated only is micelles, no, sir?
Associated colloids are what? Micelles. Yeah, I guess. There only you will have critical missile.
It's like a subcategory, right?
Yeah. Craft temperature, right? All again for missiles, study this also. What is craft temperature? What is CMC? Critical missile concentration, right? Those things also you study for what about missiles. Okay, so those are the classifications, right? Okay, what now? You still don't answer the question which I asked. What are the properties of colloids? For example, when you look at me, what do you say properties? Say he's tall, right? I don't know, you have not seen me, but I'm 6'1", right? Say this guy has beard, he teaches chemistry, even though bad, but okay, right? These are the ways which you say that the properties of the system, or say properties of whatever you want to call it. Properties are basically descriptions of a system, right? So tell me what and all describes what and all that colloid does, which makes it a colloid. What and all it does? What are special to colloids?
Sir, it looks like a homogeneous solution, but it's actually heterogeneous.
Okay, fine, good point. Yes, so it is actually a heterogeneous mixture, but it looks like homogeneous. Good. Okay, fine. Then I'm looking for some terms, some scientific new terms which you studied from the chapter. What all you studied? Something starts with B. B for Bombay.
Brownian movement.
Correct. Right. That is a property of colloids. Brownian moment is a property. You see that the colloid particles will be in continuous random zigzag motions. That is a property of the colloid. Okay. One is Brownian moment. Okay. Next.
Tyndall effect.
Tyndall effect. Right. So these are all the properties: particle size, homogeneity, Tyndall effect, Brownian moment. Any other thing is there?
Charge.
Charge of the colloid, right? Whether they have positive charge or negative charge colloids, right? So other than that, you have how do you prepare colloids? How do you purify colloids? Purification, under purification only you have your oh my god, what is it called as? Dialysis. Right. So you have normal dialysis, electrodialysis. Okay, that is purification process. And then the protection, ultrafiltration. Yes, you use cellophane sheets, right, as the filter paper, right? So those come under purification processes. And then you go for protection for a lyophilic colloid. You add a lyophobic colloid, you add a lyophilic colloid so that it gets protected, right? And then you conversion of a colloid to a precipitate. You add an electrolyte, so it gets precipitated. So with there only your flocculating values, coagulating powers, Hardy-Schulz rule, all this comes into the picture, right? So that is the entire chapter basically. Okay, classification of colloids, preparation of colloids, purification of colloids, properties of colloids, and the other stuffs. Flocculation, coagulation, all this other stuff, right? And in adsorption, you have what is an adsorption? Two types of adsorption: physical adsorption, chemical adsorption, and the Freundlich adsorption isotherm. Only three things are there in adsorption. And catalysis we saw. These are
So
things
what's gold number, sir?
What number?
Gold number, sir. I read something somewhere.
Oh, gold number. Yeah, even I read it somewhere. No, gold number. It is the amount of electrolyte required for some 10 ml solution in 1 minute or something, right? That definition will be given in a textbook. Please look into it. Gold number basically talks about how much amount of that particular electrolyte is required for the particular amount of the colloid to coagulate, to precipitate. That is what is gold number. Okay, just check the definition in your textbook. It will be given in NCERT itself.
Okay.
I think at the bottom most or something in that page, it should be given gold.
Yes, sir. That's where I read it. Somewhere just gave.
Yeah, the definition also will be given there, and it's not that important. Flocculating value is what is more important.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So yeah, that's about the chapter. So I think we just have to complete solid state. That will do. No, tomorrow we'll do metallurgy. Okay, and then next class would be solid state, and then after that it would be amines. So last 3-4 classes. That's it. Okay, last 3-4 classes. Today is 19th. Oh my god, 24th is what is your exam? 24th and 25th. Is there anyone having before that? 24th is the first for most of you, and then some of you have 25th. So today is 19th. So you have, today is Friday. Tomorrow you have school?
No, sir.
No,
we
sir.
don't. Shankara doesn't.
Can I take class?
Yes, sir.
Morning you will have mathematics, isn't it? 6:30 to 8 or something. 6 o'clock to 7:30 or something. You have mathematics.
6 to 7:30, sir.
6 to 7:30. Okay. And then you have physics from 3:30 to 5. Can I take 10 o'clock? I have. Oh my god. Can I take 11:30 to 1? Is it okay for you? 11:30 to 1, and then again evening 5 to 6:30. Is it okay?
Yes, sir. I'm okay. Sir.
I know this. I shouldn't be asking you these questions because I know what will you like. What are you going through? Like already so many classes, but I'm just trying to complete the question before Saturday, Sunday. That's what I'm trying to do, right? So if you can give me 3 hours tomorrow, that is 11:30 to 1 and 5 to 6:30. That will be a good one. And Sunday, I'll tell you, we can plan something. Sunday, we already have 10 to 11:30 in the morning. So that would be 3 classes. So most probably I should complete, right? If at all no, Monday 1 extra class. That's it. So is it okay for everyone? I think almost all of you are here. Yeah, 4 of you are here. So can we have tomorrow 11:30 to 1? Or if you have any other work, it's okay. You can tell me that also. So now 2 people said yes. What about other Varun, Aditi? Aditi only, right? Or I don't know who it is.
Yes, sir.
Harini. Okay, Harini, is it okay? Shall we have?
Yes, sir, but I have a scholarship exam tomorrow.
Scholarship exam at what time?
I exactly don't know the time, sir, but it's okay. We can have class.
Okay, fine. So I will talk to Chitra ma'am. I'll ask her to schedule the class. Or are you okay with this going on till Tuesday? Are you okay with it? Tuesday would be 23. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. 20, 21, 22, 23. Yeah, it will become 23.
Sir, Tuesday exclusively mock tests will be better, no, sir.
Correct. Actually, that will be better. That's what. So we'll do it tomorrow. Tomorrow 3 hours, and then Sunday maximum to Monday. Monday I will try my level best. I don't take it. Okay. So Saturday, Sunday will become. This week will come.
Okay, sir.
Okay. I will speak to Chitra then. Right. Thank you, guys. We'll meet again tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.